And thank you all for joining us today. Just a reminder, this is a WebEx meeting, so please mute yourself. You should have been muted when you come on, but make sure you're muted. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Dan Allwine. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Policy at the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, or SPC, and we are the cooperative forum for regional collaboration and planning across the 10-county Southwestern Pennsylvania region, but I know some of you all are from outside of our region, so thank you for joining us. SPC has a water resource center that promotes regional collaboration on water topics and is a leader in facilitating coordination and education and providing technical assistance to our member governments. One of those efforts can be found here today with a really exciting presentation that will compare common MS4 best management practices. So you MS4 permittees can be spending every precious dollar wisely and as cost effectively as possible. Before I introduce our esteemed speakers, just a few reminders. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you all receive a link to the webinar in your email. And that another reminder is that all of our past workshops here at the Water Resource Center is available on our website, and I'll put that link up on our chat. Again, a reminder to please mute yourself. If you do have timely questions, raise your hand during the conversation, and our hosts, Aaron or John, may call on you. If they don't, please put your question in the chat box and they'll address it at the end. Again, raise your hand and you may be called upon, or put your question in the chat box. So let's get started. Today, our presenters are John Cassitz. He's the Client Solutions Manager at RES, and Erin Latavic. She is the Senior Project Manager at HRG. They have a lot of really useful tips and projects that they've completed themselves or they've worked on. So we're excited to get things going. Erin, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for everybody for attending here today. Here's a general agenda of what we're going to go over here. We do have some introductions, of course, some BMP experiences to share with you, some good, some bad, some ugly. Stream restoration background and project examples, and then, as Dan had mentioned, we have some cost comparison data on the different BMPs we've installed over the last few years, some tips at the end of the day, and then we'll have plenty of time likely for question and answer. As Dan said, John and I are glad to be interrupted, so please, raise your hand and unmute yourself if you have a question, as that particular slide's on the screen. Otherwise, anything that's put in the chat we'll review at the end and then respond to.
Cool. Thanks, Aaron. And we'll be, bear with us, we'll be toggling back and forth here between Aaron and I. So we'll try to give each other subtle cues to move on to the next slide, but bear with us if there's any clunkiness there. But again, John Cassitz with Resource Environmental Solutions, or RES. We maybe have worked with some folks who are calling in the different kind of markets that we operate within, but we're a turnkey ecological restoration company. So we fix wetlands, streams, green stormwater infrastructure projects, endangered species habitats in an ecological offset world. So typically the work that we do is boiled down to some sort of credit, a stream linear foot, a MS4 pound of sediment reduction. We have an endangered bat bank in Pennsylvania where we sell endangered bat credits. So we're a private commercial company that works exclusively in the ecological restoration industry, typically through these ecological offset markets that I'll give a quick overview to, just to introduce you to what that market is. So it's a relatively niche marketplace, but we're a relatively large player in these spaces across the country. And we've had the opportunity to do a lot of really cool work in this space across Pennsylvania to the tune of over 60 miles of stream restoration, hundreds of acres of wetland restoration, and over 2,000 acres under active conservation and stewardship across the state of Pennsylvania. Next slide, Aaron. When we mentioned ecological offsets, this actually does apply to the conversation here today. But the markets that we operate within, generally speaking, across the country, kind of fall into these four different buckets that I'll quickly introduce. Most folks are familiar with us as a company from the wetland stream mitigation banking industry. So we do a lot of work with public and private customers across Pennsylvania who have unavoidable impacts to wetlands and streams and other ecological resources, bat habitat as well, where we're generating credits and offsets in a turnkey capacity to satisfy those projects' mitigation requirements. So the ecological offset industry was largely kind of developed around wetland mitigation banking, stream mitigation banking, and that's a realm that our company operates a lot in across Pennsylvania and the country. This approach gets attached to environmental lawsuits periodically if there's a ecological impact as a result of a bad thing that happens. If something happened that went wrong and led to some ecological impact, our company gets involved to help settle those cases with these environmental offsets, typically against some sort of credits. We're here today to talk mostly about water quality and stormwater, where that kind of market-based ecological offset approach is being applied across the country, actually, in different ways to help communities address kind of legacy water quality challenges in urban environments, in rural environments, in suburban environments. Many states are really trying to wrap their heads around how to address, again, large-scale legacy water quality challenges through this ecological marketplace that we as a company are involved in, which is now really an established thing here in Pennsylvania through the MS4 program, with PennDOT in particular. And then lastly, we won't spend much time on this, but we do work with a lot of large corporate customers that have ESG, CSR, kind of investor-driven ecological restoration goals within the communities they operate within. This is a smaller part of our business, but we do work with large companies that want to do something good on the local landscape within the ecological space, and they come to us to help them find projects and implement projects as quickly as possible. Last slide, Aaron. I'm gonna call command. Sorry. One thing that we won't really dive into a lot today is, but what I think is the kind of special sauce with our company in these ecological offset markets is the turnkey, full delivery, performance-based project implementation, which in our experience, where it can be applied to projects, can help projects get in the ground faster and more cost effectively when you have one entity who is responsible for the full life cycle of the project, which might include land acquisition, siting, due diligence, certainly design, permitting, construction. And then oftentimes our projects have a 2, 3, 4, 5, 20-year long operations and maintenance period that is part of the full success of the project. And this turnkey full delivery approach, where it can be utilized, allows companies like us to take on the responsibility for the full life cycle implementation of the project and be accountable for the long-term success of that project, which again, we've used that business model across these different markets I've introduced in a way to get a lot of really good projects in the ground with a lot of accountability we're able to take on from our customers to make sure that the good work is done correctly. So Aaron, I'll hand it back over to you to do a quick intro to HRG.
Great, thanks, John. So HRG is a full service engineering firm headquartered in Harrisburg, PA, not far from where I'm currently situated. But we do have offices across the state. One of the differences between my company and John's company is that a lot of HRG's clients in the water quality space are public. So it can be difficult for us to do that design build approach and cut out some of those opportunities for risk because state code requires that projects be designed, signed and sealed by a professional licensure, licensed in that particular vocation, and then publicly bid, which adds lots of time to projects and cost to projects. So John and I have developed an interesting, sometimes we're teaming relationship, sometimes we're competing relationship, because some clients need a different type of approach. And fortunately, we get to talk today about some of the work that we've gotten to work together on pretty collaboratively. So HRG has been in existence since 1962. Here's where our offices are distributed across Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. And our Pittsburgh office is actually located in Cranberry Township. A little bit of my background. I am a civil engineer with a geology background from Allegheny College and Penn State. I'm in the eastern part of the state, so most of my work is Chesapeake Bay water quality focused. A lot of, all of our MS4 permits in my neck of the woods are enhanced because we're within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And I work a lot with counties now in addition to municipalities. So in that effect, I've even been asked by or nominated by Governor Wolf's office to represent Pennsylvania in what's called the Science Technology Advisory Committee, which is a committee of scientists and technical people that can actually help influence policy across the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So I really feel really fortunate to be able to have a bit of influence there. So I do a lot of different types of panel discussions, as you can see there on that picture. Just recently won an award, which is embarrassing, but I'm kind of excited about it. So you can see some of my HRG folks there with me and my husband. But most importantly, I'm really passionate about water quality because I've been planting trees for a long time. This is a picture of me, my husband, and a couple other folks in the township planting trees back in 2013. Tropical Storm Lee really slammed our part of the state and flooded a lot of communities in this particular area. There were some homes that we were able to buy out with PEMA dollars, and we're able to restore that area as a riparian buffer. But I'm also passionate about it because I'm a streamside landowner myself. My husband and I live along the Conewago Creek in Dauphin County, Lancaster County border. So I'm going to go through a couple examples here of one project that went bad and some others that went pretty well. Because for those of you in the room that are practitioners, you've probably experienced some of this yourself. And I guess part of this is simply one of those messages of it happens to all of us. So back in 2017, we had a municipal client that had a park with an area of grass that just didn't grow very well. We found out later on it was because of wet site conditions. We actually thought it was because it was too shady. Upon additional inspection of the site conditions, we did notice that there was a swale alongside a roadway embankment that's owned by PennDOT. So the poorly draining swale nearby should have been a clue that something was amok. We did the typical design preparation for the project. It was really small scale, so there weren't any regulatory requirements. The conservation district didn't need to review anything, didn't fall under NPDES requirements. So the client wanted to go kind of cheap on it, and so we did. We didn't do much due diligence, and whenever we went to construct it, our rain garden quickly filled up with groundwater. The groundwater table was really high. Coincidentally, it was a year that we had a really rainy summer. It thunderstormed like every third day. So on top of the already wet conditions, the wet conditions were made wetter by the weather that year. So at the end of the day, the township did end up building it. It was a project that was bid out. Whenever it really wasn't constructible based on the design, we had to modify it. We improved the slope of the BMP bottom so that it could drain better to that swale. But at the end of the day, there's still a permanent pole in this rain garden, as you can see on the right-hand side. The plantings that were put in place survived pretty well post-construction. There's some educational signage there at the site that you can see on the left-hand side. But this was not a win for stormwater BMPs. You know, people in the public, even whenever it's in a park setting, they don't necessarily like to see standing water. It looks untidy. You know, the landscaping isn't the best for some public spaces, just with some perception. So suffice it to say, a simple rain garden project next to a playground isn't always as simple as you think it will be whenever you're doing your initial site visit. And this is an example of when you have an MS4 permit requirement and you're a public entity like a municipality, your first inkling is to try to use as much of your public land available to place BMPs because it's the easy land to work in theory. This was not the ideal condition for a BMP. Fast forward a couple years, we learned from that experience, and in a different park, there was a detention basin that was built, I forget, in the early 2000s, maybe 20 teens. And 10 years later, after the detention basin, which was supposed to be mown, wasn't, it filled up with cattails and became a maintenance headache for public works. As part of the township's MS4 program, they did decide to do a retrofit to the basin. This is I think this is right after construction, whenever the landscaping was pretty new. You can see some of the grasses starting to grow along the slopes there. But we basically over excavated the basin, improved the outfall structure, put fresh landscaping back into place, and gave the water a path to take again. 2 springs later, this is 18 months post-construction, as that note says. Native grasses were able to take over. The trees are starting to look like trees. The shrubs are starting to filter the runoff. And the infiltration area was actually performing pretty well. So we were pretty happy with this retrofit, and it fit the space, generally the landscaping space of that park pretty well. Another example that HRG worked on in the last few years is in Cumberland County. Their pollutant reduction plan was approved after being written by township staff. But after township staff turned over and somebody else had to pick the plan up, they just weren't certain that the plan was implementable as written. So the areas in color there on the map are part of their urbanized area mapping. They were reconsidered to place BMPs completely on township-owned properties where possible, as that third bullet point indicates. But fortunately, the new plan writers also did build in some redundancy. So if some of the BMPs didn't work out, they'd still have some options. This table outlines the basin retrofits that were put in the pollutant reduction plan. They are 4 detention basins that were built in the 90s, 2000s that the township actually owned, which I know is not an issue in all municipalities, but it does happen. And of course, they might have been mowed for those years, but the water quality benefit of those basins was very low. So you can see what the footprint of the ponds there is. 1/2 an acre or less. Drainage areas ranged pretty significantly from about a 2-acre drainage area up to 113. So each of these basins were constructed this past year. I'm just going to show you a couple examples of what the historic conditions looked like for these basins. This one is in a residential subdivision with a concrete end wall with no orifice plate, so it really didn't have much rate control at all. Very minor sediment reduction potential, and the spillway discharge accessed a point off of a roadway, which actually created some right-of-way issues later on. Here's some pictures of the existing conditions. You can probably think of a location in your own township if you're a stormwater person where you've seen these things before and you know that they could be better. So for the retrofit, we basically included some updated grading, new orifice plate, new outlet structure, and modern landscaping to be able to make the thing look a little nicer at the end of the day while also filtering water.
Aaron, just a general question about these kind of projects. Do you, from your perspective, do you feel like these are oftentimes targeted as projects because they're kind of low-hanging fruit and they're a way to get sediment reduction credit? Or is it more that like these facilities typically need some sort of TLC anyway, and this is a way to kind of double dip that you got to do something anyway, so we're gonna be out there working, we might as well try to maximize the amount of kind of benefit for the community by doing it in a little bit different way through the MS4 lens?
Yeah, good observation, John. It is a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think if the basins were designed and constructed at more modern standards, there wouldn't be a lot of benefit for improvements other than maybe public education. If there's like new native plants or something that should be installed and they could put signage up, that could be an opportunity. But certainly for these, when there's so little water quality benefit, there's really not much detention benefit either. On top of the public education opportunity, and the township owned it, it really checked off a number of the boxes as to this is why we would focus here. But at the end of the day, and we're going to go through this in a little while, if you're making decisions based on cost, even when you can check those boxes on a project like this one, it still might not be a good investment. So we will get to that in a little
Yeah,
bit.
but oftentimes you probably do need to do something anyway. So if you can get some benefit out of it, that certainly helps justify doing the project. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So here's a bit of of the Cicada Basin retrofit in construction. The bottom picture I included because that's amended soil installation. Engineers include amended soils in our designs all the time, but I think a lot of times we forget about what the scale of that looks like. So that's why I wanted to include that as an example here in case you haven't seen that in the field. On the upper right hand is similar to that other basin right after construction finished up. So hopefully next spring everything will be grown in nicely and it won't look like a mowed detention basin like it does right as the grass is starting to sprout. I mentioned before that when you have outfall structures along roadways, sometimes that can create some logistical problems. For this particular project, the client was really interested in getting it out on the street for public bidding because I mentioned earlier about the schedule and costs associated with it that sometimes makes the public client approach a little bit more challenging for implementation. For this particular one, I think the project was put out to bid before all the downstream easements were in place. So it ended up delaying whenever the contractor could get started. And of course, just creates problems whenever you think you're ready, but you're not really ready. So friendly reminder to recall that projects aren't really shovel ready until you have all the land acquisition needs met. And I'll hand it to John to talk about some buffers.
Yeah, I think this is one I expect Aaron to chime in on as well. So I think people, all of us are familiar with riparian buffer projects, probably have all taken part in riparian buffer projects. Certainly they are, one of the really good tools in the toolbox to maintain MS4 permit compliance, with this type BMP. They're relatively inexpensive to certainly design, install. You can always get volunteers readily available to help you plant trees. A good opportunity for community engagement. And there's certainly a lot of other benefits besides just checking a regulatory MS4 box by planting riparian buffers. However, we'll flip to the next slide. They do require work. And I think that's the point to make is they require some TLC after the initial ribbon cutting install ceremony takes place and the pictures get uploaded to LinkedIn and to the township, the township publication. They may require some sort of easement or land protection to guarantee that the landowner or someone else may not come back in and cut all the trees down 3, 4, 5 years later. They really don't tend to produce a lot of MS4 credit, which is just part of the dynamic there, but they're still really good projects. But again, I think the point we wanted to make is that they really do require some TLC. This is one of our projects from a few years back. I took these pictures myself, so they came from my phone. Of the tree tubes in the picture here on the screen, I think I counted them yesterday. There's probably like 15 tree tubes. Only 2 or 3 of those have surviving trees within them. So if you're being held to certain standards of survivorship, which you probably should be, these require some TLC to be really effective in the long run. I think I've got one more picture there with some buffer pictures that again, kind of a more challenging location. But this was different time of year, so it looks different. But all of that vegetation that's literally taking over the trees in the background, I think that's mostly Oriental bittersweet. This site also struggled with some Japanese hops, and I think mile a minute or porcelain berry, which are some of the more kind of routine, challenging species on riparian buffer projects. So good projects. They're a great BMP. Everyone should have this, I think, in their kind of repertoire and their toolbox of potential BMPs. But just acknowledge and realize that they do require some TLC after the initial install.
Yeah, and I think I'll add that again, in my neck of the woods, that we're trying to implement more BMPs all the time, even over and above what MS4 requirements lay out. And so for that reason, there are a lot of nonprofit organizations actively doing riparian buffer plantings and are realizing now 10 years later that these things don't just survive on their own. Like, yes, it's Penn's Woods, but these trees need some help. So they're starting to create groups of people called riparian rangers Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay is I think the lead on developing these things, but Penn State Extension is also getting involved. And the idea is that project budgets can't always accommodate for maintenance contracts from professional landscaping companies and others after the fact, but that these things to survive still need people to check on them every once in a while and do something to help. So the idea is to recruit volunteers through this Riparian Rangers type program that basically has little pods of people distributed across counties to maintain and provide some assistance to the trees so that the landowner is not entirely up for it. And finding money for contracts later on isn't as much of a stress. So we'll see how it goes. It's still it's like 2 or 3 years maybe in the making. So that's not much when you're looking at construction seasons and growing seasons, of course. But my hope truly is that sites like this that took so much effort just to get planted will have better survivorship as a result.
Yeah, the other kind of 2 cents I'd throw out there for riparian buffers is that, and again, this is my personal 2 cents, having seen a lot of these projects and just driving around on my bike and hiking around the landscape over the past couple of years. I think riparian buffers benefits are limited the more impaired and larger the watershed is. I can't tell you how many parks and public preserves I've been to where they did riparian buffer plantings 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, and then due to the changing climate, the changing rainfall patterns we're experiencing, the riparian buffer plantings, if they're even alive, are being actively eroded and washing downstream. I think it'd be really interesting, and I don't have the answer to this conundrum, but I think riparian buffers are really maybe more impactful within things like ag swales and other upland-ish areas where they can really start to treat stormwater flows before they get into the stream, because some of our stream systems are just honestly so badly impaired that riparian buffers will not fix them. In fact, they're probably throwing the money away because the buffers might wash away over time, even if they are maintained, just due to the active erosion taking place on some of our streams across the state.
Yeah, we've seen that too, John. In my mind, the buffer should be the last thing planted, not the first.
Yeah, and that then brings in these really interesting dynamics with like large landowners, farmers. Mm-hmm. Farmers don't really want big, tall trees growing on the edge of their field or in the middle of the field. So, could a buffer simply be like native shrub species that provide a lot of the same benefits of a wooded, a forested buffer, but are in lower stature plants that have less shading impact on agricultural landowners in particular. So it's an area that I think we'll all be kind of learning more about as the years continue. So
yeah, agreed.
Cool. So we're going to jump into stream restoration here for a few slides. And I know we did a presentation a month or two back with Dan and the commission. I think that presentation is online at the Water Commission's website if you want a little bit deeper dive into stream restoration. But that in our experience, I think Aaron probably would agree, if you have large scale sediment reduction requirements within your municipality, stream restoration is the most cost-effective BMP at scale, and we'll share some cost summaries towards the end of the presentation here today. But there's a slew of regulatory requirements and boxes to check when you're utilizing a stream restoration BMP as one of the BMPs for your MS4 compliance. I think that the message we want to share here is that there's a lot of detail involved in calculating how much sediment reduction benefit a stream restoration project will provide to the municipality, and also stream restoration, large scale ecological restoration is still a relatively new practice, if you will, 20, 30 years old, probably at most. That's a relatively short time frame in the grand scheme of things. All of us practitioners are still learning things on every single project. Our regulators are learning things on every single project they see. The regulations are evolving. The folks in the room here at different, different stakeholders, you guys have a stake in how these regulations evolve with your local DEP. There's all kinds of boards and other kind of nonprofit groups to be a part of to help kind of maybe help influence where our industry goes, within the restoration industry goes moving forward. So this is definitely a very dynamic part of industry to be involved in, as we all collectively learn, do more projects and learn more about how these projects work and function post restoration. So
yeah, John,
again,
I think I'll just add that I hear conversations specifically about even different groups of colleagues within DEP that will visit different stream restoration sites across Pennsylvania and realize that stream restoration that works in Lancaster County is not going to necessarily work in Butler County. So, the practitioners are starting to learn from each other as well, which is really, heartening. I just hope that we can come to agreement, as much as researchers can agree on things,
yeah,
so that our design standards evolve in the right direction relatively timely. I mean,
yeah,
our state's BMP manual is from 2006 and has been
sure.
getting updated for the last, I don't know, 10 years or something like that. It's way too long for us to evolve our practical work, right?
Yeah.
So I'm glad for these checklists. I'm hoping that they get better quickly.
Yeah, I think the point that I like to make with people is that I think we all would benefit from a dose of humility as we engage in these different stakeholder groups. I mean, a lot of us are really, passionate professionals. We have done a lot of good work. We've learned a lot, but the reality is we only know what we've done and what we know. So when as all of us are engaged in these, these conversations, again, kind of a dose of humility that we know something worked really well here. Like to Aaron's point, it may not work as well over there, a county away, a watershed away. And really probably also need to let the kind of science dictate what these programs look like moving forward, but also we all have a part to play in helping to bring ideas to the table and to be flexible with how they're applied on the landscape.
Yeah.
And just in the stream within our company, I'll give you one example. Within our company, there can tend to be some almost like theological debate about natural channel design, stream restoration versus legacy sediment floodplain restoration. It's really funny seeing your own internal colleagues within your company having some pretty robust debate and not really agreeing on what the outcome is with just different restoration approaches as they're all still evolving. So next slide. So that we as a company tend to use the floodplain restoration approach with our BMP projects, MS4 BMP projects, as well as our wetland stream mitigation banks and other mitigation projects. The culprit, so to speak, that oftentimes explain to people is from the DEP's perspective is actually in-stream sediment sources. So again, if you walk across almost every single corner of Pennsylvania, many of our streams exhibit 1, 3, 4, 5, 20-foot high, vertical raw eroding banks. Every time it rains, there's millions and millions of pounds of sediment washing from within the stream system itself, washing downstream, carrying that sediment, carrying those nutrients that are bound up within those sediment particles. So this floodplain restoration approach, in our experience, when you're kind of on the hook for the long-term success of the project, tends to be the most cost-effective restoration approach where you have the room to do it. These are relatively kind of, I'll say, impactful restoration projects. You need to kind of scramble a few eggs to make an omelet with these kind of restoration projects. They are large scale construction projects trying to kind of basically rebuild these stream corridors back to the way they may have been kind of pre-European civilization. This restoration approach is oftentimes called legacy sediment restoration for those in the south central, southeastern part of Pennsylvania. You may be more familiar with that legacy sediment term. We use a kind of generic floodplain restoration approach or integrated wetland stream restoration, but basically we're reestablishing shrub, forested wetlands within these new, smaller stream corridors with a larger, wider floodplain that's reestablished along that stream corridor. Next slide.
And John, I was just on a project site with an elected official the other day, and I had to make the point that what you see here is infrastructure. Do you have any comment about that?
That's a leading question. I'm not sure where you're leading to, so feel free to jump in. Yeah.
Well, my point at the time was that because of all the federal infrastructure dollars that are now available to elected officials of all levels to influence, the idea was, yes, this project is being built for MS4 purposes, but, And at the end of the day, 10 years from now, you're not even going to know we were there, kind of thing, right? Because the trees are going to be grown up. The system will be the natural system that could have been here 200 years ago, to your point exactly.
Mhm.
But the idea is that these stream systems are natural infrastructure. So
Absolutely. Yep.
it's why the investment in these types of projects is so wise.
Especially as the world's changing, the climate's changing. I mean, we've lived through this. Honestly, I'm 43 years old. The climate is different now than it was when I was a kid growing up. Again, and that is affecting our streams and our natural resource infrastructure. To Aaron's point, that do need some TLC. So. And I mentioned that the culprit being those kind of raw, eroded stream banks where the sediment's coming from. This was one particular site in York County that we designed, permitted, and built back in 2019. So the picture on the left-hand side is obviously pre-restoration. That's probably that same year, 2018 or so. The picture on the right-hand side is 4 to 5 months post-construction. And the point to make here is that the source of sediment, which is that raw eroding stream bank, is basically not present in the restored picture on the right-hand side, where those stream banks have been stabilized, restored, and there's now is a 50, 70-foot wide floodplain wetland corridor along a much smaller and shallower stream post-restoration. So again, some kind of pros and cons, because again, this tool, should not be applied for every single project and every single MS4, permittees kind of suite of BMPs. But again, on the positive side, it tends to be the most cost-effective at scale when you look at large-scale sediment reduction needs within a certain township or group of townships. If it's sited well and designed and built well, it tends to have pretty low cost long-term operations and maintenance as well. From our perspective, again, we oftentimes are sharing with people the maintenance efforts are relatively robust years 1 and 2 post-restoration. But if we get the right stuff established vegetatively in those first critical years, years 1 and 2 post-restoration, the amount of TLC in years 3, 4, 5, and 6 and beyond really gets ratcheted down to the point that ideally 5 years from now, post-restoration, if it's been designed, sited, permitted, built well, and kind of maintained well through those first critical years, it really should require little to really no long-term O&M if it's sited well. And again, these projects also have a lot of other kind of a little bit warm, fuzzy, tangential benefits to the community. Just one example: the governor of Pennsylvania back in June, I think, announced Pennsylvania's first Biodiversity Day. They held the press brief, the press announcement for Biodiversity Day at one of the MS4 projects that Aaron and I partnered with in the Harrisburg area. The Fish and Boat Commission loves seeing this active restoration project literally right down the hill from where their offices are, as that site has reestablished post-restoration. It's an MS4 BMP. It's providing, really focused on providing MS4 regulatory compliance. But the reality is we've reestablished 4 to 5 acres of new wetland areas that are providing habitat for a myriad of native herps, bugs, fish, all these kind of critters that we need to have in the ecosystem, as well as from a biodiversity vegetative standpoint as well. Now, on the kind of con or negative side, again, these projects, we can't kind of force projects in areas that don't fit, but they tend to have a higher initial construction cost than some of the other BMPs we discussed here. Again, when you're weighing BMPs, you're looking at dollar per pound standpoint. At scale, they're more cost effective, but the reality is once you start working in and building a stream restoration project, there's inherent sunk project costs that are probably going to be more expensive than some of the other BMPs that we're looking at here today. I mentioned how critical siting is. The reality is some municipalities may not have a perfect site for a stream restoration project. So that is a conundrum that folks face. You may not have the room for it. You may have a lot of other existing infrastructure that is kind of clogging up the works around that stream area. Everyone knows that within these stream corridors, there's a lot of sanitary sewer lines, water lines, gas lines, power lines, a lot of infrastructure to work around that can make those projects a little bit tricky to design and permit and build. And oftentimes they do require more specialized contractors. If you're working in a stream, things can go south pretty quickly if you have like a large rain event while doing a stream restoration project. and your contractor has never worked in a stream and had to deal with the large, storm flows through some of these project footprints during construction. So tend to require folks that have some experience doing that kind of work, as opposed to kind of trying it out, so to speak, on your project.
So some of HRG's clients have decided to do their own one-off type of stream restoration projects, and it was neat to be able to compare some of the results of these projects to ones that John and I have collaborated on, because the outcomes are pretty different. These one-off projects can have many benefits because they'll be located in public places and might address localized impairments, but they don't always give you the lowest dollar per pound of sediment if that's really your primary goal, to save money. So here's an example of one in Dauphin County that's under construction right now. You can see on the left-hand side here a little bit of asphalt. That's actually a paved path that's part of this particular township's expansive trail network. This one is publicly accessible. The township did stop maintaining the banks for a while, but you can see a foot or two of eroded stream bank with little substrate in the stream bottom itself. The tree roots on the right-hand side here actually help indicate what the historic stream bank height has been. So to John's point, you can imagine a wedge of sediment that used to be there that no longer is. As I mentioned, the township did stop mowing the area, so they did have a nice buffer technically alongside it, but the banks kept sloughing off, so the township decided that they would do a stream restoration intervention, and that they would complete it as part of their pollutant reduction plan. Here's a bit of the design plans that HRG had pulled together. Includes, of course, regrading of the stream channel and side slopes, and then some installation of different materials, brush mattresses, live stakes, riparian buffer plantings, constructed cross veins, and a riffle pool sequence. So the idea was to improve the grading so that the stream could be in a relative shape to what it used to be at one time, but put back successive plantings of the vegetation that needs to get back in place, and also include habitat structures for the critters in the water so they have a place to be. This project is actively under construction, and it's kind of interesting because they do call it Deer Run for a reason. There's a buck right here in the middle of this picture. And as I was scoping through our construction pictures, our inspectors are also deer hunters. So I was so pleased that they caught this one because it was a nice surprise. So they do call it Deer Run for a reason.
So the slide here is one that HRG, Aaron, and I have been working on for, I don't know, 2 or so years now, Aaron, with actually the projects in the ground. So this was, again, this is a project that's subject of some other webinars, and we've done PennDOT's contact, and I've done some presentations on this for PSATs a few times over the years, but really an interesting approach on MS4 compliance coming from PennDOT. I mentioned at the outset, the market that my company works in is typically this ecological offset, kind of fixed unit cost per widget or credit. And this was a neat opportunity where PennDOT kind of applied that mindset and model towards MS4 compliance to try to reduce PennDOT's cost to satisfy PennDOT's MS4 burden, which is the biggest one in the state. So it's probably worth noting that all the folks in the call here, if you guys are associated with municipalities, you might have a MS4 sediment reduction target of 100,000 pounds per year or 300,000 pounds per year. If you're a larger municipality in Chesapeake Bay, I've seen 500, 600,000 pounds per year. PennDOT's target is, I think, something like 4 to 5 million pounds per year. So PennDOT's dealing with this across the state and at a much larger scale than any other MS4 permittees around the state. So PennDOT really had to get serious about figuring out how to establish MS4 permit compliance as cost effectively as possible due to the scale of their requirements across Pennsylvania. So this was a really neat case study where PennDOT collaborated with 3 MS4 permittees in the Harrisburg area, Capital Region Water, Susquehanna Township, and Lower Paxton Township, who again, in a really positive way, had already been partnering their resources and sharing resources to tackle MS4 compliance through the development of a joint PRP. And then PennDOT was the other kind of partner to layer on top of that. Those folks were able to kind of combine their funding. PennDOT was the one that facilitated design, build, operate, maintain, contracting to help identify vendors that could generate the most amount of pounds of sediment reduction for the lowest unit cost and provide the most bang for the buck, so to speak, for all of that public funding. And PennDOT administered the contract on the part of all those municipal partners. So again, really a neat, really positive case study coming out of the Harrisburg area with PennDOT. This model is being employed across Pennsylvania, and we are not the only company that does this. There's a group called Land Reclamation Group that's working in the Ohio River Subbasin now in the Pittsburgh area with PennDOT, and really the exact same model, just in the Pittsburgh area. Another company is doing the same thing in the Delaware River watershed in the eastern part of the state. So PennDOT's really been I would say a leader in, this creative procurement approach, if nothing else, to get these projects in the ground as cost effectively as possible and reduce the liability for the permittees, the MS4 permittees. We have a couple of pictures here, I think, coming up next, but this was the one of the particular BMP locations pre-restoration. Just again, unfortunately, due to historical legacy, poor land use practices, really a beat up system, not providing as much ecological functions and value as it could. Producing and creating a lot of sediment and nutrient loading downstream within the Paxton Creek watershed pre-restoration, and then we'll jump to post-restoration next. So post-restoration, again, nice, lush wetland plants, biodiversity. We're tackling the there's a little bit of cattail out there that we'll be whacking back so that doesn't take over the system. But post-restoration, again, those stream banks that were 2-3 feet high, raw eroding pre-restoration are now barely visible, and they're in fact covered up by 12-foot high grass species that were planted within that floodplain corridor. So this is what we want all of our projects to look like. These projects, again, do require some TLC. They don't all look this lush and beautiful and fresh within the first growing season post-restoration. Sometimes these projects take 2 to 3 years, 2 or 3 growing seasons post-construction to look like this. But this is the trajectory that we hope to see with all these projects, if they're sited well, designed well, built well, and kind of giving nature a chance to reestablish itself within these wetland stream floodplain corridors.
Great. So when our clients are building these BMPs for MS4 purposes, they tend to know that the dollar per pound unit, the thing on the right-hand side here, is the ratio to review for cost effectiveness. The rain garden that went bad, the one at the very top, at the end of the day, it basically cost over $100 per pound to get to the outcome that's on the landscape today. Now, there's other co-benefits related to that project because of the public education opportunity and so on. But from an MS4 regulatory perspective, it's a loser project, right? It is functioning today and it's teaching park goers about stormwater, but that's really about it. The next 4 projects, no. This Greenfield project was the second one I highlighted. That was the one that was done a couple years later, was much larger scale, got done right the first time. It came in at about $27 per pound. These 4 detention basin retrofits, Cicada, Con House, North and South, and then the township building, they were all bid out in the same construction scope by one township. So as I was looking through these numbers, I just simply observed that the township building retrofit, which is only a 900-pound project, in the contractor's bid, it only cost them $5,000. And you can be certain that if that had been a one-off project, it would not have cost $5,000. The bulk of the cost for the overall project was tucked into the larger BMPs, and this one was kind of a small add-on. But similarly, based on the pounds outcome from each of those projects, you still have a range from, I'm going to ignore the township building, from $12 up to over $50 per pound for the detention basin retrofit example. Don, I'll go over Deer Run, and then I thought maybe you could jump down to yours. Great. So for Deer Run, again, that was that one-off stream restoration project with the buck picture in it. It cost $2.5 million for that township to have the township engineer design it, put it out for public bid, paid prevailing wage, and so on. So but that still gets you down to about $5 per pound, which is a pretty good comparison compared to the detention basin retrofit examples. So to John's point, it was a larger scale project. But it being a one-off project didn't necessarily make it the absolute cheapest alternative when you have potential partners like PennDOT at play in the future.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good point to make, Aaron, about scale. And I'll use the Paxton Creek one as a kind of a good example of that. The bottom four on the bid tab table here, those are all PennDOT collaborative and PennDOT led initiatives across the state of Pennsylvania, again, covering every corner of Pennsylvania from Ohio all the way east to Delaware River watershed. So if you are interested in collaborating with PennDOT, I'd recommend reaching out to them as soon as possible. And Aaron or I can give you the contact information for the folks at PennDOT that are in charge of their MS4 program. But I'll just focus on the Paxton Creek watershed one because we had highlighted that in a few slides back. We did 3 BMPs as a part of that $2 million contract delivery. 2 of those BMPs are probably more like $5 to $6 a pound BMPs if viewed individually by themselves. The third BMP is a big dogger. That's probably like a $2 a pound BMP just due to the size and the scale. When you bundle all 3 of those up together, that's how we were able to get down to that $3.49 a pound and win that contract and implement those projects. So that point about scale, that's a really freaking good point when it comes to designing and maybe constructing a suite of BMPs. If you can increase, contractually increase the scale of the project, I think it really is a big way to kind of drive down the unit cost if you're able to do that within your MS4 permit compliance program.
No comments on the other ones here.
They're cool projects. Yeah, we're involved on 2 of them. Maybe an interesting one, because I mentioned all the evolving regulations surrounding MS4 stream BMPs in particular. I'll call attention to the Chesapeake Bay, the lowest dollar per pound one on here. That bid came out from PennDOT. That doesn't really matter when. I think it was about 2 years ago. They awarded the contract to a different company, not us. I think our bid the first time that RFP or IFB was put out was something like $2.50 a pound, and we as a company were not the low bid winner. There was some procurement issue with how that first contract got awarded, and ultimately PennDOT put that bid back out in the streets. In the intervening time between when we as a company lost the first bid and when the second bid came back out to kind of have another bite at the apple, we just frankly learned some regulatory things with sediment delivery ratios and just learned some more nuance of the DEP's, protocols, guidelines, policies surrounding MS4 projects. That regulatory knowledge helped us find a better location to put better projects into that next bid when it came back out, helped us lower our project cost down to $1.95 a pound. And we were able to win that project. Again, the cool thing for PennDOT is the flexibility, the creativity, the problem solving on the part of companies like ours to kind of win these projects is driving down MS4 compliance cost for all of us as residents of Pennsylvania. Like, that's a great win for all of us that PennDOT has this humongous multi-million-dollar MS4 burden through creative procurement, doing things at scale, volume savings. That's been a tool PennDOT's used to save the Commonwealth literally millions of dollars. And then you start layering municipalities partnering with PennDOT, sharing credits. Like, the dollar saving wheel is just kind of spinning behind the scenes by just kind of doing things in a little bit different way, being a little more creative with how we want to tackle some of these kind of, again, legacy society-wide water quality issues we face.
Yeah, great point, John, because it's all taxpayer funded, right? And we're all taxpayers of various scales. And if MS4 isn't driving it, should the work stop? Probably not. It'll probably still be grant funded too, which are still somebody's tax dollars, right? So, I'm so glad that the industry is getting to the point where the costs are getting driven down, because lots of other costs are going up.
Yep. Yeah, that's another really interesting point, because we are all of our companies, organizations are struggling with staff shortages, can't find people to hire them, construction cost, gas cost. Some of these PennDOT contracts we signed pre-COVID, pre all those supply chain challenges. We're kind of on the hook to deliver them and deal with all those changing market forces. And we're figuring that out, as we move along through these contracts. Doing things a little bit differently from a procurement standpoint may actually be a tool to help kind of protect yourself from some of those future market changes that we have a hard time forecasting into the 1, 2, 3 years down the pike.
Yeah, great point. So the Paxton Creek project is one that is the one on this list that John and I are both involved in. And it is a really interesting example of intergovernmental partnerships. He mentioned that the two townships and a water authority that covers the city of Harrisburg had already partnered together and created a joint pollutant reduction plan years ago, whenever they first had the requirement with their individual permit. They all have stormwater fees at this point, so they do have some cash flow to work with, but of course they're trying to stretch those dollars as far as possible. So I think the PennDOT partnership discussions started roundabout in like 2016, 2017. I mean, it literally took years for the goals to finally align and the legal steps to proceed to figure out how to do this invitation for bids concept, how to get through the legal requirements of the design, build, maintain concept. So suffice it to say, you can see on this table that $3.49 per pound is a pretty great rate and is a great example of why intergovernmental cooperation is worth the struggle, because it's not easy.
And I would think even like prior to PennDOT's involvement, the fact that those three entities partnered together, probably going back to 2012, maybe, Aaron, you'd know better than I would do. Yeah. But that was almost like the first really significant positive way of tackling that, by three municipalities kind of joining forces, combining their funding sources. And then the PennDOT kind of layering on top, it was a kind of cherry on top, so to speak. But that collaborative piece is so huge, I think, in getting these projects done as cost effectively as possible.
Yeah, and I have another example on this slide of another regional partnership that HRG was involved in. The Wyoming Valley Sanitary Authority established a stormwater fee back in 2019. They're located in Luzerne County, and at that time, we're going through the struggle similar to the Paxton Creek municipalities of trying to deal with new MS4 regulations while not having everything perfectly tied down under the former permit. So they were having these communities were having trouble just to get through the minimum control measures, the MCMs. Layering a pollutant reduction plan and implementing it on top of it was just unwieldy. So leadership from the sanitary authority ended up connecting with HRG, and we worked together on developing their regional stormwater authority. It now includes 32 municipalities. They have varying levels of involvement in different portions of the program. But at the end of the day, the communities are saving in a range from 50 to 75% on their MS4 programming while now being compliant. They were spending very few dollars before the authority got involved, but they weren't MS4 compliant. So now they're compliant while not doing it on their own and saving a lot of money.
We thought we'd kind of run through, a couple kind of, lessons learned over the course of the years working in these kind of projects and developing these kind of projects. And Aaron, definitely chime in. Some of these are kind of focused on stream restoration BMPs because we kind of introduced that as the most cost-effective at scale BMP to employ. But a couple of things that we really focus on as an organization as we're working on these projects is site selection is so key. If you lock yourself into a bad site, you will waste hundreds of thousands of dollars compared to the similar project footprint in a better site, if you will, from size, watershed, room to work, less constructability issues during construction. Aaron mentioned earlier that oftentimes a lot of municipalities kind of focused on the use of public space, which again has a lot of benefits from an educational standpoint, awareness standpoint. From our perspective, again, if you're looking at the lowest dollars per pound, sometimes putting a BMP on private property where you're actually paying for the rights to do that work can be more cost effective in the long run from the full project cost than getting free land, so to speak. Now, again, in that Paxton Creek example, ironically, Two of those BMPs were on public land, including township parks. The third one was on private property, required us paying for an easement from that landowner. So that's just, that's one part of site selection from a land ownership standpoint. The reality is, honestly, dealing with private landowners can get really tricky and sticky, and you need to have ironclad agreements in place. Otherwise, you can't build something oftentimes on private property. So that public versus private land is a big part of our business as we're looking at kind of both land sources while trying to find the most cost-effective projects. But also really understanding the full life cycle of these projects. It is, I would say, probably to be expected to take 1 to 2 years during the kind of due diligence, design, permitting, site selection process, and then construction might last a week, a month, 3 months in time, for a larger project. But then these projects all do have some sort of TLC and maintenance and monitoring requirements post-construction. That is part of that BMP's project cost when you're looking at comparing the cost benefit of different BMPs. Really just thinking about what's the full long-term life cycle cost of this project, and will that long-term life cycle cost be variable with certain kind of BMPs versus possibly more fixed with other kinds of BMPs that require less TLC. When looking just at stream mitigation or stream restoration BMPs, from our perspective, there's a certain minimum size. We really try to avoid projects that are less than 1 to 2,000 linear feet in length, just because you get less bang for your buck, so to speak, if you're looking at large scale. We ideally, there's the kind of right amount of impairment in the stream. Very large streams like Chartiers Creek out in the western part of the state, those are going to be more costly streams to do MS4 BMPs on than something like a second or third order stream that's a perennial flowing stream with active erosion and impairment, but is not quite as large as those large fourth, fifth order stream systems. And again, we kind of mentioned this point several times about having the right team looking at the project from the outset. And again, we work in this full delivery, design, build, operate, maintain world. We'll only be doing a small percentage of these projects. There might be more creative ways for folks working outside of that construct to get a local contractor to spend a day with you looking at potential BMP locations to give you their 2 cents on constructability issues. And I think what at the end of the day, you want to avoid that kind of finger pointing post-construction where something didn't go well. Was it a design issue? Was it a permitting issue? Was it a construction issue? Can you kind of resolve some of those potential issues during the upfront design process by having some more folks in the room looking at these projects? A lot of these municipalities have really savvy construction folks on staff in the road department, in the public works department. Those folks know construction. Have them be part of the conversation when looking at these different restoration BMPs to know, what is actually constructible and what are the things that maybe just the engineer or designer from their perspective might be missing if they're not actually out there building these kind of projects. And again, lastly, just to kind of hammer this point home again, the regulations are evolving. There's probably 2 or 3 or 4 different ways to score a stream restoration project to determine how many pounds of sediment reduction that project's going to provide to the municipalities. The DEP has some flexibility for approving higher efficiencies for stream restoration BMPs, which is pretty significant. That can really save a lot of money. If you want to tap into some of those different regulatory angles, that may require a year pre-construction of site analysis, pre-construction data collection, that if you didn't do that pre-construction data collection, you may not have the opportunity to kind of tap into that higher efficiency a DEP might be willing to offer you with a certain kind of BMP.
I think I'll just add that the partnership aspect, the PennDOT partnership for these projects has been incredibly helpful for municipalities. It'll be interesting to see what opportunity there is in the future. I think that with the contracts that have been let and awarded at this point, that might address PennDOT's MS4 permit compliance for this permit cycle. But for those of you paying attention, you're probably aware that the current permit was just extended for a year. DEP's put together a work group that's going to start talking about pollutant reduction plans of the future and what's reasonable for municipalities and things like that. If at the end of the day, PennDOT has another slug of pollutant reduction requirements in the future, maybe it's not sediment, maybe it's nitrogen, who knows? Don't be surprised if that partnership might be a chance again. So don't know if there's open opportunity at the moment, but certainly it's a winning approach. And I hope that we can do it in the future with them and even some of their sister agencies.
Yeah, on that topic, Aaron, if partnering with PennDOT is a consideration or of interest to folks, I would recommend reaching out to them. Again, Aaron and I can give you the information for the folks at PennDOT that are in charge of those programs, which is in Harrisburg. It's not in your local, your local PennDOT district office, unfortunately. But there is going to be the opportunity for municipalities to continue to collaborate with PennDOT. The issue is going to be that they're kind of tapped out with their ability to fund and co-fund the projects. I think what PennDOT's viewing their role in moving forward is probably going to be more helping to facilitate the contracting part and the procurement part of it with folks like us who have those contracts, not just us, but folks like us, that folks will be able to kind of, tag on to those contracts from a procurement standpoint. But the ship may have sailed currently as far as kind of collaborating with them from a financial cost sharing perspective. So
yeah, it makes sense. So that's the end of our formal presentation. We'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have for us. Thank you again to Water Resource Center and RES for inviting me to co-present with you, John. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
and our contact information is on the screen if you want to get a hold of us in the future.
Dan, I don't know if we got any questions.
I haven't seen any come across now.
Okay.
That's all. Does anybody want to ask Aaron and John any questions? Okay, I think with that we can end the session. Again, everyone will receive a follow-up email with this slide deck and the recording. And a big thanks again to Aaron and John for giving their expertise to our side of the state. A lot of stuff here we'd like to copy in our region.
Great. Excellent. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks,
See
everybody.
y'all.